What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and you know what? Dominaria is a pretty good set. But if you're anything like me, you're already getting sick of all the like $500+ super competitive decks with all the Karns and the Tefris and the Lyra Dawnbringers. I got the Walking Ballistas and the Chandras, and everything's like $50 nowadays. And that part got old real quick. Dominaria can be as good as we want it to be, but it's still going to be kind of lame to have to pay $1 billion for all your decks. So for the next few days on the channel, we're going to try to do what we do, I think we do best at least, and try to bring you all of the like best super budget decks in the format. Starting today with Red-White First Strike.
I got the music in me, knew it simply had to be my destiny. I'm blessed to be the best within my CNHEND. Please believe not Ninja Gaiden. I'm not the guy to fight with them lightning. They come in dumb and I leave them enlightened.
And I'm back. I didn't leave you forever. I would never do that to you, girl. But anyway, a lot of people, apparently, were excited about this deck, you know. This was the second place deck in the last Patreon poll that I did. But it was the closest Patreon poll that I've ever done. So a lot of my patrons are hyped about this, and I'm pretty excited to bring it to you. This is a sweet little aggro budget beater here. And it gets to play a lot of cool new legends from Dominaria. The most important one, though, is definitely Quinde Pride Ephemerith. Well, this guy's obviously the entire reason that we're here. You know, this is our big payoff for playing like 20 different first strike dudes in this deck. And it's a pretty good payoff, it turns out. You know, this has immediate effects on the board the turn that it comes out. You get immediate value out of this, so long as it's not removed during or before your attack step. And it's pretty sweet. You can turn, you know, when you get it even on curve, on turn 4, you can turn, you know, a relatively small amount of damage into a lot of damage, like 8 to 10 damage on just a couple of creatures on turn 4. And if you wait until turn 5 or 6 to play it, you can do some really gross stuff. But it's filthy even on like turn 12, you know? If the game stalemates and you top deck this when you've got a pretty full board on your side, then it gets really, really dumb. You can do some crazy stuff with this and just come out of nowhere and deal all the damage. So Quinde is actually good in a bunch of different situations. And I'll play all 4. I know he's legendary, but again, he's the only payoff for the first strike. So I want to see him as often as possible. And he's really fragile. You know, he's only got the 2 toughness. So I want to have extra copies of Quinde in reserve just in case he gets taken out. And he will. You know, like Shock will kill him. So it's good to have some extra ones laying around because you're going to need them. And yes, it can suck to get this removed at inopportune times, you know, so protect it as much as you possibly can. Remember that it doesn't have to swing in. If you sniff out a seal away in your opponent's hand, you don't have to swing in with Quinde. They can use that seal away on something else. You really don't want them to target Quinde with it. So just protect it whenever you can is all I'm saying. But Quinde has to be built around in order to actually be good. So now the question becomes, what are the best first strike creatures in Standard? And the answer is surprisingly deep. There's a lot of depth in first strike creatures right now in Standard, especially if you want to upgrade the deck. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but for now, the first striker that I want to show, that's weird to say, the first striker that I want to show you in the deck is Danna. We're playing 3 of this because I actually think this is a great list to put Danna in. Well, of course, she's got the first strike, so there's that. I mean, she's good in this deck for that reason, if no others, but it turns out there are other reasons, you know? Like, you know, turn 3 Danna into turn 4 Quinde is a play line that we can get fairly often. That's a nice thing to be able to do, but we're also playing some equipments in the deck that she reduces the cost of. So we get a lot of juice out of Danna here. And by the way, just last thing here, the lifelink and vigilance are both really relevant. You know, I've already talked about seal away. Vigilance is very good against seal away, so there's that. Anything that doesn't tap to attack. Pretty decent against that card. Heart of Kirin has already proven that in this format. And this has that going for it. Another legend we can play, by the way, you got a lot of legends in this deck, and that's actually going to matter for a reason a little bit down the line. We'll get to it when we get to it. But we do get to play 3 copies of Kari Zev in this deck, which is already just good without any real payoff to playing her. You know, she's just a good, aggressive creature. The 3 toughness matters a lot, actually, too, because she can attack into certain boards, you know, certain creatures. She also brick walls a lot of early game creatures, so she plays a little early game D when you need her to. There's a lot of advantages to playing Kari Zev right now, even if you don't have any payoff to doing it, but you know, once you get a Quinde out and maybe even an equipment on her, she becomes especially dangerous. So she's good for all the reasons she's good, but she's especially good here. But while we're talking about 2-drops, we actually have a lot of really good choices for first striking 2-drops right now. So it's kind of tough to whittle it down, but I think we definitely should play 4 copies of Knight of Grace, no matter what. Here's the thing. We'll never actually boost this thing's power to 3 in this deck because we're not playing any black permanents, but it's still totally worth, it's 100% worth, having a 2 power, 2 toughness, which actually matters in this format, full of Fanatical Firebrands and Walking Ballistas and even other things that can just take out 1 toughness creature super easily. Having 2 toughness on our 2-drop is actually kind of important. Plus we get the first strike for when we actually do get our Quinde out, and it can't ever be fatal pushed or battled at the bridge, or walk the plank if that matters. Can't be cast down, can't be Vraska's Contempt. There's a lot of black removal spells. Black is kind of known for removal. So, Unlicensed Disintegration is going around a lot right now. Can't touch this. So I think it's that important to play Knight of Grace. It just dodges so much right now. Even though we'll never boost its power, I kind of don't care about that whole block of text because the card is good enough without it. Now, I wanted to play another 4 of 2-drop here, but it was kind of a tough decision, and in the end, I ended up on Aether Chaser. I think that this does more for us than some other things we could play, and I'll talk about some other options, again, towards the end of the video. But for now, I'm going to talk about why I like Chaser. First of all, we don't really have the money in this super budget deck for a whole lot of, dual lands. There's Clifftop Retreat, there's Inspiring Vantage, but getting play sets of both of those costs more than this whole deck costs right now. So I want to run Aether Hub instead because we can take advantage of the fact that it's fallen to like 35 to 50 cents right now. Not only that, but, it's got the first strike. And it can make a little creature that we can chump block with or even get in with if we need to. It fuels Harness Lightning or it fuels Aether Hub while being a 2 power 2-drop with first strike, a relevant ability in this deck. Then I think it's done its job. It's just a really versatile piece at just 2-drop, Unlike other 2-drop creatures we could play with first strike, this generates immediate value and does something for us, even if it dies. And I really like that about it. Creatures like that tend to be very good. Another creature like that is Emissary of Sunrise, which I'm only going to play a couple of copies of in the deck. This isn't necessarily the best card in the deck. In fact, I'd say if you're going to cut a card for sideboarding, this is usually what I start with, to be honest. I don't want to cut the creature count too much during boards, but this is definitely the first creature I usually look to take out. That's why we're only playing the 2 copies of it, but it's relevant when it's relevant, If it explores, and then you get a Quinde, if it explores and gets a counter on it, and you get a Quinde the next turn, well, then you can swing in for 6 with just this thing. That's cool, but sometimes, conversely, it'll help you get the 4th land for the Quinde that you want to cast on the next turn. That's nice too. So there's kind of a lot of just kind of edge good cases about this card. Emissary is not the worst card in the world, but it's also not the strongest card in the deck, so I'll limit it to a 2 of. But I do want to play a fairly high concentration of creatures, at least 20 first strikers, and this helps us get there, and fills out an important slot in the curve. Danna can't be our only 3-drop, and this is actually one of the better 3-drops we have access to, so I'll at least run a couple of copies. Now I get to talk about the 3 copies of Skyship Stalker that we're playing, which has consistently overperformed. This is actually one of the better cards in the entire deck right now. Quinde or not, because a flying threat that can pump and get first strike is an answer to a lot right now, It's an answer to Lyra Dawnbringer, which is we don't have a whole lot of, especially on a budget we don't have a whole lot of. But it's an answer to other flying creatures like Heart of Kirin, again, it really just costs 2 mana to pump this up and then give it first strike and block a Heart of Kirin. And so that's not terrible either. And it's a really good attacker when you need it to be. It's a great top deck in the late game. You rip this on turn 9 or 10, again, regardless of whether or not you have a Quinde. You can still slap it down, give it haste, and pump it for a few, and get in with a really, really good threat out of nowhere. It can't be killed, by the way, this matters. It can't be killed by a Glorybringer, because Glorybringer's exert ability only works on non-dragon creatures. So that's another piece of edge tech. This is a mana sink. We don't have a whole lot of those in this deck, so this performs that function too. This just does a lot. This does an awful lot, actually, It's a flying creature. Don't have a whole lot of that in this deck, and flying double strike tends to be a good combination. So, at first I was playing 2 copies of this, but realized that I kind of want to push it to 4, but we're playing kind of a lot of 4-drops in the deck, so I'll keep it at 3, but it is that good, trust me. This is, again, consistently one of the best cards in the deck. In the last creature in the deck, we're just going to play 1 Tianna in here. This is actually usually just a worse Skyship Stalker. for a whole mana more, and I don't necessarily like that about it, but it is cool because it's a legend. Again, we'll need that for a reason. You'll see in just a second. I'm not going to hold it back too much longer, but we do need some sort of high concentration of legends in the deck, so she helps out with that. Plus, we're playing some equipments, and we've even got some auras in the sideboard, so if we can ever even get one equipment or aura back with her, she's done her job. But now let's look at all this equipment I keep talking about. We're actually only playing a couple of pieces of equipment in the deck, but I think they're the best equipments we could be playing right now. I went through a few different things, and again, I'll talk about those options later on in the video. But for now, I'm going to show you a card that really impressed me. I've already told my patrons that I really, really liked Black Blade Reforged in this deck. This is the real truth. Well, first of all, a really good playline with Black Blade Reforged is to just go turn 3 Danna, and if you get your 4th land drop, you can just play it and equip it to her. And suddenly, you have a 6/6, first strike vigilance lifelink that's swinging on turn 4. That is one of the best playlines in the entire deck. But we're also playing 11 total legends in the main deck, and then another one in the board, so we've got a ton of legends in this deck that we can easily equip this to, on the relatively cheap, and this just gets better the longer the game goes on. It turns all of our, junk land draws in the late game into really good draws that boost our creatures. That's fantastic, and if the game does go long enough, you can just start equipping this to anything if you've got the mana for it. So it's also flood protection in that way. There's a lot of kind of really good things about this, and it's cheap to cast. It's not super cheap to equip, but it's very cheap to cast, especially if you have a Danna out. And once you start putting it on anything, it just makes every creature in the deck a ridiculous threat, especially with the first strike. But it is awesome that this boosts toughness. Once you get 5 or 6 lands, it turns every single creature in the deck into an unbelievable monster. I'm babbling on about this card because I really want to stress how impressed I was. So I am telling you, Black Blade Reforged is absolutely insane. It pays for playing a high concentration of legends in the deck, and especially with Danna around, it's convinced me that it might actually be low-key the best equipment in Standard in literally years. But I'm also going to make some room here for 3 copies of Forebear's Blade. I don't want to play all 4 or anything. It's not that stellar, but it is pretty dang good, and it's worth noting that it gives the creature vigilance if it doesn't already have it, which again, say it with me at this point, is protection against Seal Away. This deck has a lot of protection against Seal Away, which matters kind of a lot. Not to mention that once we equip it once, we often won't ever have to actually pay the equip cost for it, ever again. So there's a fairly high initial investment to this. If you've got a Danna in play, it still costs 5 mana to play this and equip it on the same turn, which is kind of a lot. And if you don't have a Danna, good luck. That's 6 mana, But it's not so bad later in the game when you rip it off the top of your deck and you've got the mana to play it and equip it the same turn, and suddenly one of your creatures is enormous. Whoops, how did that happen? And it can attack profitably and still stay up on defense. And again, when you've boosted a first striker by 3 power, it can play defense really, really well. So this card is actually pretty impressive too. If I had to put another equipment in the deck, it would definitely be this one. There was another one that I was thinking about, played with for a while, and I ended up taking out. I'll talk about that one at the end, but I feel like we've ended up with the best equipment package we could muster in this deck. Forebear's Blade is a better card than it might appear at first glance. But to finish things up here, I'm going to play a couple of removal spells in the main deck, starting with the 4 copies of Harness Lightning. Like I said earlier, we've got a slight energy theme in the deck, so this pulls a lot of weight, we can kill a smaller creature with it, and then leave behind mana for Ether Chaser, or more likely Ether Hub. Or we can take mana from Ether Chaser or Ether Hub and pump it into a Harness Lightning that's big enough to kill a Lyra or whatever. An Ether Chaser plus Harness Lightning is enough energy to kill a Lyra, which is really, really relevant, but it can kill everything in between too. I think this is, especially if we're on an energy theme, obviously, a really, really versatile piece of removal that we should play so that we can we can kill smaller creatures in the early game, or even relatively big creatures in the mid game. But I'm also going to play 2 copies of Vic Salons Binding. This is actually the most recent addition to the deck, but after trying to win with this deck for a week or so, I felt like we absolutely had to have a piece like this in the deck. Whether it's this or Cast Out, it doesn't really matter. We're not really looking to hold up mana in this deck, so there's not a whole lot of advantages to playing a card like Cast Out that's instant speed. That said, there are some advantages, things like God-Fear's Gift and Glorybringer. Kind of important to have instant speed, things like this against, so you could play Cast Out if you wanted to. But Vic Salons Binding fits into our budget and is arguably a better card in some situations, but I felt like we needed a piece like this to get rid of all the Karns and the Tefris and the Chandras that we have no other option against, and the artifacts that we don't have a whole lot of options against. So there's so many high value threats in the format right now that we might not be able to harness lightning, or they're just not creatures like these planeswalkers that we're worried about, that I felt like a main deck option to take these things out was absolutely necessary. So even though we're kind of pushing it in the 4-drop slot here, I did feel like we had to play a couple of copies of something. Now, we're playing 25 lands in this deck, and you might be able to comfortably go down to 24 if you're playing a bunch more dual lands. You might be able to do that, but 25 is actually right, We want a good amount of lands so we can eventually start equipping Blackblade Reforged to not legends, but we also want to be able to play Blackblade Reforged on turn 5 and equip it to a legend. So we need our land drops to be able to do that. We're trying to get Tianna. We're trying to get to Quinde on turn 4 consistently every time, so 25 lands helps us do that too. I actually think that this might be the right number even if you have dual lands. This is a hungrier deck than it looks like, because you got to play and equip, equipment. Skyship Stalker is a mana hungry card. You're trying to get to a 4-drop consistently, so I actually think 25 is right. Now here's our sideboard, and some of this is self-explanatory. In case you were wondering, there's the Path of Metal, This hasn't actually been impressive enough against mono red decks that play a lot of haste creatures that this just skips over. Won't kill all of their Bomat Couriers and their Fanatical Firebrands and their Earthshaker Kenras and even a couple of other things they may tend to play in the early game. So I just didn't think it had enough, real effect against that deck. It's not against Goblin Chain Whirler or anything, so it does do somewhat good against tokens builds and mono blue aggro decks that are running around and Llanowar Elves and stuff. So there is reason to play this card for its first ability, but in just about any game where you can flip it over consistently, it'll provide you late game reach, and that's good against some decks too. So I didn't feel like it was right for the main deck, which really surprised me. This was definitely going in the main deck when I started building this deck, but in the end, I decided it was actually better for the sideboard. I've also got 3 whole copies of By Force in here. You could play Release the Gremlins, but honestly, I want to be able to spend not a whole lot of mana to blow up a good amount of targets, Again, Karn and Heart of Kiran are big cards in the format that play really well together. And usually, they will, especially because Karn is around, that'll make whole decks be built around this sort of artifact sub-theme. So I want to be able to blow up like 3 artifacts for 4 mana. Now the rest of it is cute. If you haven't noticed, we've got Squire's Devotion and Compulsory Rest in here, and another copy of Tianna to take advantage of the fact that there are more auras and stuff in the sideboard. But Squire's Devotion is actually kind of good against aggro. This is another option that can give a creature lifelink, so Danna won't be our only lifelink creature. And lifelink and First Strike are great together. So this can really help keep us in the game against aggro decks, and it gives an eventual creature that will double strike a power toughness boost. So that's also kind of a good reason to play Squire's Devotion. But while we're packing Tianna, we can get extra value when the creature that's holding a devotion dies. So that's also kind of a good tie-in, and it's the whole reason that we're playing Compulsory Rest. I actually think this is cute. And in this deck, if they do want to pay the mana and sacrifice the creature to gain the life, then we can always just get the Compulsory Rest back if we have a Tianna out. And I think that's a cool interaction. So even though it's a bit cute, I think the card is actually just good enough that if we're building a budget sideboard, it goes in. But there were a few budget options that I didn't play in the deck. I'll start with those before I get to the upgrades. I didn't play Rigging Runner or Burning Fist Minotaur or the other equipment I wanted to play, Captain's Hook. Now, I was on 2 copies of Rigging Runner to begin with, but honestly, it just wasn't relevant enough. We don't have a whole lot of other very early creatures that can really get this going on turns where it needs to be relevant. Same thing with Burning Fist Minotaur. I didn't end up wanting to discard like extra lands to this. It's a decent mana sink, and it can be really good in the early game. And once you get a Quinde out, suddenly this can hit for 8 damage. I mean, all of that is good. But at the same time, we need our extra lands. Again, the plan was just to discard junk lands to this, but we need to get to at least 5 mana for some of our equipments, if we want to play them in equipment on the same turn. And Tianna's 5 mana. Skyship Stalker, again, very hungry card. We're trying to get to even 7 mana in the late game so that we can equip Blackblade to regular creatures. So we need our extra lands in this deck, and I just didn't feel like Burning Fist was conducive to that. But it is a much more aggressive creature than the other 2 drops we're playing. And if you're just looking for blind aggression, this might be the thing to consider. That's me. You can try Burning Fist if you want to. As far as Captain's Hook, though, this is another case of a card that's really, really aggressive. This is actually much more aggressive than any of the equipments that we ended up playing. And it actually cost very, very little to play this and equip it on the same turn, especially if you have a Danna out. It's very aggressive in that way. But in the end, I felt like Forebear's Blade was just a better card. When they abrade our Captain's Hook, or when they, cast out, or Vic Salons Binding, our Captain's Hook, or when they Teferi's -3, our Captain's Hook, the creature dies. And there are just so many cards in this format, especially post-boards, when they Thrashing Brontodon, or Naturalize, or Forsake the Worldly, our Captain's Hook, then the creature dies too. It's so easy to get 2 for 1 with a Captain's Hook that I really feel kind of silly playing it. But again, if you're just going for ravenous aggression, this might be a consideration. And as far as upgrades, there are actually some very good upgrades you can make to the deck. You could play Goblin Chainwhirler, or Direfleet Daredevil, or Lyra Dawnbringer in this thing. All of these are great first strike creatures. Repeat, great. These are disgusting right now. Goblin Chainwhirler would require some adjustments to the mana base, but I think you can actually play a Plains or 2 and still get this card relatively consistently. And Goblin Chainwhirler is just back-breaking against all the aggro decks in the format right now. Plus, you could make an argument that this deck plays Goblin Chainwhirler to the best of its potential, because obviously we're taking advantage of the first strike. And we can follow Goblin Chainwhirler with a Quinde. That is nuts, son. So Goblin Chainwhirler definitely goes in here if you can make the mana and the money to get it in there. But here are our power rankings. A final score of 60, not too bad. Really not too bad to breach 60 here, especially considering this deck is only about $20 to $25. For $25, the deck has a lot of good play lines. There's a lot of good turn sequences in the deck. The deck has a surprising amount of good top decks for what is effectively just a lame budget aggro deck. But if you rip a Skyship Stalker or a Blackblade before it's super late in the game, you're suddenly right back in it, kid. Once it starts getting equipment and Quindays out, things get out of control if your opponent can't answer it. Or maybe they've already used all of their good removal in the early to mid game, and they didn't save anything for Quinde because they may not have known they were supposed to do that, especially in game 1. So, and again, I've already mentioned this, but this deck has a lot of plays that let it just come out of nowhere and just kind of win on the spot. So you got that going for you too. I actually like a lot of what this deck is doing. And if you want to try it out, again, won't break your wallet, but I don't want you to overpay for it either. So click the first link in the description, just hit show more, and then you'll see some links. There'll be more than one, but you click the first one, and that'll take you over to my pals at TCG Player. They're good folks. They help sponsor my content, and that's very nice of them. But they also happen to be where you can get this deck for cheapest right now. Again, don't overpay even for a cheap deck. Just click the first link in the description. You can view the deck list from there, or you can order the whole kit and caboodle if that's what you want to do. But even just clicking the link helps the channel out, so remember that. But other ways you can help the channel out is by liking the video. Super low effort. You can also subscribe if you're new. Join the click. That would help out. Make sure you hit the bell for the notifications because it's effectively budget week. I'm going to be giving you some super budget decks for the next few decks, and you probably want to be a part of that. So sub, get the notifications. Follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev for stuff. And then for $1 a month on Patreon, I'll let you know what decks we're doing next. And you can participate in these polls I keep jawing on about. So $1 a month, not a bad deal for that. But I'm done for now, so I guess I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. And even when you're beating face with this thing at F&M, remember, spread love and be kind.